I felt weaker every day until the pharmacist called and said, "Ma'am, these aren't your pills. They're placebos." My husband had been trying to kill me. I stayed quiet, refilled his bottle with something special, and watched him take his morning dose. 3 hours later, he was begging me to call 911. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. My hand shook as I reached for the pill bottle on the bathroom counter. I watched my fingers fumble with the child-proof cap in the mirror. My reflection was pale. The skin around my eyes looked thin and bruised. I had blamed the fatigue on a lingering virus, on poor sleep, on age. But this tremor was new. I swallowed the small white tablet with a sip of water, the routine so ingrained I hardly tasted it. Downstairs, Richard was already at the kitchen table, the financial section spread before him. The smell of his coffee filled the room. "You're late," he said without looking up. His tone was light, a simple observation. "The eggs will be cold." "I didn't sleep well," I said, my voice steady despite the unsteadiness in my limbs. I took my seat, the plate of scrambled eggs and toast precisely arranged. This was our ritual, 43 years of marriage distilled into this morning silence, broken by the rustle of newsprint and the careful scrape of a knife on toast. My heart fluttered in my chest, a frantic bird. I pressed a hand over my breastbone, willing it to calm. Richard glanced over. "Palpitations again?" "A little," I admitted. "You need to rest more, Ella. Stop puttering in that garden all day. It's too much for you." He took a long drink of his coffee. His concern was a practiced thing, woven into the fabric of our daily life. I had always found it comforting. Now the words felt like a diagnosis, a sentence. I pushed the eggs around my plate. The thought of eating turned my stomach. The weakness was a constant weight. Climbing the stairs left me breathless. My thoughts, usually sharp, felt muddy and slow. I was a retired librarian. My mind was my most prized possession. Feeling it slip was its own particular terror. The phone rang, sharp and sudden in the quiet kitchen. Richard sighed, annoyed at the interruption. I rose to answer the wall-mounted unit by the pantry. Prescott residence. "Mrs. Prescott? Ella? It's Maureen, from Hartman's Pharmacy." Her voice was low, hesitant. "Oh, hello, Maureen. Is there a problem with the refill?" My monthly medications were a calendar event. Richard picked them up for me. A kindness, he said, so I wouldn't have to make the trip. "That's why I'm calling." She paused. I could hear the hum of the pharmacy in the background, the beep of a register. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something. The prescription for your beta blocker, the metoprolol, the bottle you brought in last month for the refill, where did you get it?" I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "Why?" "Richard brought it in. Is there an error?" "The prescription number is valid. The doctor's details are correct. But the pills inside the bottle you gave us..." Another pause, heavier this time. "They aren't metoprolol. I checked them when I filled the new prescription, just a standard verification. The markings are wrong, the size, the weight, it's all wrong." The kitchen seemed to tilt. I held onto the counter. Richard was laughing at something in the paper, a short, dismissive chuckle. The sound was miles away. "What are they?" My voice was a whisper. "I ran a test. They're inert, Mrs. Prescott. Sugar pills, placebos." Her words were crisp, clinical, and they cut through the fog in my head with surgical precision. "You haven't been taking your heart medication for at least a month. You've been taking nothing." I stared at the back of Richard's head, at his neatly trimmed gray hair. He took a final bite of toast, utterly relaxed. The world did not tilt. It shattered, and then reassembled itself into a different, horrifying shape. Every unexplained symptom, every wave of dizziness, every skipped heartbeat had a source. It had a face. "I see," I said. The words were automatic. The part of me that ran a household, that hosted dinner parties, that answered phones, was still functioning. There must be some mix-up. "There's no mix-up on our end," Maureen said quietly, firmly. The pills in that bottle were not dispensed by any legitimate pharmacy. Someone put them there. Thank you for calling, Maureen. My tone was polite, distant. I'll look into it. Mrs. Prescott. Her voice was urgent now. You need to see your doctor, immediately. Going off that medication suddenly can be very dangerous, and be careful. I hung up the phone. The plastic receiver clicked softly into its cradle. The tremor in my hand was gone, replaced by a perfect, terrifying stillness. Who was that? Richard asked, folding his paper. The pharmacy, a question about the insurance copay. The lie flowed smoothly. 43 years teaches you how to do that. I have a headache. I think I'll go lie down. He waved a hand, already absorbed again. Of course, rest, I'll clean up. I walked out of the kitchen, my steps measured. I climbed the stairs, one hand on the banister. My heart was pounding, a hard, painful drum against my ribs. Was this the arrhythmia, untreated and wild, or was it sheer, undiluted terror? In our bedroom, the door closed softly behind me. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, catching dust motes in the air. Everything was in its place. The neatly made bed, my reading glasses on the nightstand, the novel I'd been too tired to finish. A perfect, peaceful scene. I went to my dresser and picked up the current pill bottle. It looked legitimate. The label had my name, the drug, the dosage. It had come from Hartman's, filled by Maureen just yesterday. Richard had given it to me after dinner with his usual, "Don't forget your pills, dear." I opened it and shook one of the small white tablets into my palm. I held it up to the light. It looked identical to the one I had taken this morning, to the dozens I had taken over the last month. But it was not a medication. It was a counterfeit, a mockery. I sat on the edge of the bed, the pill cool and smooth in my hand. I thought of Richard's concern, his suggestions to rest, his gentle admonishments about overexerting myself. I thought of him volunteering to handle my prescriptions, a kindness, a convenience. It was a long, deliberate, premeditated act. He had obtained fake pills. He had emptied my real medication and replaced it with dummies. He had watched me grow weaker, day by day. He had listened to me describe my symptoms and offered sympathetic noises, all while ensuring the cause continued. The question was not one of pain or betrayal, not yet. Those would come later, in crushing waves. The first question, the only question that mattered in that sunlit room, was why? Life insurance? I had a policy from my teaching years. It was modest. Our savings were joint, but he managed them. A hidden affair, perhaps, but this was not the act of a man who simply wanted to be free. This was slow. This was quiet. This was meant to look like natural causes, a failing heart, a tragic, gradual decline. The second question followed, cold and clear. What now? I could confront him. I could scream, throw things, call the police. But what proof did I have? A pharmacist's word against my husband's, a bottle of pills he could say he knew nothing about. He was a retired financial advisor, respected. I was a frail, sick wife, possibly confused. The narrative was already written. I closed my fingers around the placebo, feeling its edges press into my skin. The weakness in my body was still there, a profound tiredness in my bones, but beneath it, something new was stirring. It was not anger, it was colder, it was clarity. I looked at the closed bedroom door. Downstairs, I could hear the clatter of dishes as Richard loaded the dishwasher. He was whistling. I opened my hand and stared at the pill, a tiny, perfect fraud. My husband had replaced my heart medication with placebos. He had chosen a method that required patience, secrecy, and a complete disregard for my life. I understood then that I would not confront him. Confrontation was for people who argued, who fought, who expected justice. I was past that. The woman who believed in fairness had died a little each day over the last month, starved of the medicine that kept her alive. The woman sitting on the bed now was someone else. She was a fact. She was a consequence. I placed the sugar pill carefully back in the bottle and screwed the cap on. I set it on the nightstand, precisely where it always rested. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I needed to think. I needed to plan. And first, I needed to get the real medication back into my system. I needed to be strong. The game had begun without my knowledge. But I knew the rules now, and it was my turn. I lay there until I heard the garage door open and close. Richard was leaving for his weekly golf game. The routine was a relief. It gave me space to think, to move. The weakness in my body was a pressing problem. I needed the real medication. Confrontation was impossible, but inaction was a slower form of surrender. I sat up. The first step was practical. I went to the bathroom and flushed the remaining placebo pills down the toilet. I watched them swirl and vanish. The empty bottle I placed back in the medicine cabinet. I would need it later. I dressed with careful attention, choosing a simple linen dress, applying a light touch of lipstick. I needed to look normal, well enough for a brief errand. I took my purse and the car keys from the hook in the mudroom. Driving felt strange. My senses were heightened. Every bump in the road, every passing car felt significant. The short trip to Hartman's pharmacy seemed to take hours. The bell above the door chimed. The familiar smell of antiseptic and paper greeted me. Maureen was behind the counter, ringing up a customer. Her eyes flicked to me, then away, then back again, sharp with concern. I browsed the greeting card rack, my hands steady now. I waited until the other customer left. "Ella," Maureen said, her voice low. She came around the counter. "You came. Are you all right?" "I need my prescription filled," I said, my voice even. "The correct one, please." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "Of course, I have it ready." She returned to the computer, typed, and then retrieved a small white bag from the will call shelf. She handed it to me. Our fingers brushed. "The pills from the old bottle, did you dispose of them?" "I did." "Good." She leaned forward slightly. "The bottle you brought in for the refill last month, it had your correct label, but it wasn't one of ours. The lot number and the manufacturer code were missing. Someone printed a very convincing fake label and put it on a different bottle." I absorbed this. It was premeditated then. Not a simple swap of pills, but a fabrication. "I see." "Ella," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "this is serious. You have to go to the police, or at least to your doctor." I met her gaze. Her eyes were kind, worried. She was an ally I had not sought, but desperately needed. If I go to the police with what? A pharmacist's suspicion? My word against my husband's? He would say I was confused, that I must have mixed up my own bottles. I shook my head. "No, not yet." "What will you do?" "I will take my medicine," I said simply, "and I will get better." I paid for the prescription. As she handed me my change, she said, "Call me, any time, for anything." "Thank you, Maureen." Back in the car, I opened the bag. Inside was a new legitimate bottle of my heart medication. I opened it, shook one pill into my hand, and swallowed it dry. It was a real, bitter little thing, a tool for survival. I drove home, but instead of going inside, I went to the garden. It was my sanctuary, a patch of earth I controlled. I sat on the wrought iron bench beneath the old maple tree. From here, I had a clear view of the kitchen window. I needed to understand his routine, not as a wife, but as an observer, as a strategist. The betrayal had reshaped the landscape of my life. Every familiar object, every habit, was now a potential piece of evidence or a weapon. Richard returned home just after 2 o'clock. I watched him park, grab his golf clubs from the trunk, and head inside. He moved with an easy confidence. He believed he was safe, that his plan was unfolding unseen. He believed I was weakening, fading. Through the window, I saw him pour himself a glass of water and take a pill from a large plastic bottle he kept on the kitchen counter. His daily vitamins, a ritual as ingrained as my own. He swallowed it without a second thought. An idea, cold and precise, began to form. It was not a plan, not yet. It was a principle, an eye for an eye, a pill for a pill. But mine would not be a harmless sugar pill. His had been an act of slow, concealed violence. Mine needed to be an act of undeniable, immediate consequence. It needed to be something that would incapacitate him, humiliate him, but not kill him. Death was too easy. Death would make him a victim, a tragic figure. I needed him to live with the result. I thought about options. Poison was out, too traceable, too final. I needed something that would cause acute, dramatic distress, something a doctor could attribute to a bad reaction or a tainted supplement, something that would prompt an emergency, a public spectacle. Later, when I went inside, Richard was in his study, reviewing stock reports on the computer. "How was your morning?" he asked, not looking away from the screen. "Quiet," I said. "I rested. I feel a bit better." "Good, good." His smile was brief, automatic. "You just need to take it easy." I went to the kitchen to prepare tea. My eyes went to the vitamin bottle. It was a generic brand, a mega vitamin for men over 60. He bought it in bulk from a discount store. It was unremarkable. Perfect. That night, after Richard had gone to sleep, I lay awake. The real medication was in my system. I could feel a subtle difference already, a slight easing of the frantic flutter in my chest. My mind was clearer. The decision crystallized. I would not expose him. I would not flee. I would turn his own method against him. He had used my trust, my routine, my health against me. I would use his. The objective was not murder. It was justice. It was balance. And it was a message. He needed to understand that I knew. He needed to experience a fraction of the helplessness he had imposed on me. He needed to be caught in a trap of his own making, where the only way out was to admit his guilt or be destroyed by the consequences of a seemingly random accident. I would replace his vitamin with something special. The specifics could be worked out. The laxative was a possibility, brutal, embarrassing, physically draining. It would require a hospital visit. It would provide a sample for doctors to analyze. They would find a contaminant in his vitamins, a shocking but explainable event. No one would suspect the frail wife. As dawn approached, the plan settled into my bones. It was a silent decision, made in the dark beside the man who was now my enemy. There was no rage in it, no fiery passion. It was a cold, hard calculation. The woman who had gone to the pharmacy yesterday was fighting for survival. The woman who rose from bed this morning was preparing for war. I would get my refill, and then I would prepare his. The decision was a quiet stone in my stomach, solid and immovable. The next step was procurement. I needed the right substance. It had to be potent, fast-acting, and available without raising suspicion. A powerful laxative fit the criteria. It would cause acute, undeniable physical distress. It would require medical intervention. It would be humiliating. And critically, it would not be lethal. Doctors would treat it as a severe reaction to a contaminated supplement, a tragic, random accident. I waited for Richard to leave for his Tuesday morning Rotary Club meeting. The house was silent, a blank canvas. I drove to a large chain pharmacy across town, a place I never frequented. I wore sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, not as a disguise so much as a shield. I felt exposed, as if my intentions were visible on my skin. The over-the-counter medication aisle was brightly lit. I scanned the boxes. I needed something with a strong reputation, something that worked within hours. I chose a product with a clinical-sounding name, promising rapid and thorough relief. The active ingredient was a strong stimulant laxative. The box warned of cramping, dehydration, and the necessity to consult a doctor if symptoms persisted. It was perfect. I purchased it along with a bottle of aspirin and a new packet of tissues, creating the impression of a mundane shopping trip. The cashier, a young man absorbed in his phone, scanned the items without a glance. I paid in cash. Back home, I hid the box in the bottom of my sewing basket, beneath spools of thread and bundles of fabric. The next phase required timing and privacy. I needed to access Richard's vitamin bottle, empty it, and refill it with the new pills. They were not identical. His vitamins were large, rust-colored capsules. The laxatives were smaller, white, scored tablets. I could not simply mix them. I had to replace the entire contents. This presented a problem. If he opened the bottle and saw different pills, he would notice. He was not an observant man, but such a blatant change might trigger suspicion. I needed the bottle to appear normal from the outside, even when opened. The solution came to me as I was cleaning out the pantry. I found an old empty bottle of the same brand of men's vitamins, one Richard had finished months ago and tossed into the recycling bin, which I had, out of habit, retrieved and washed. I had always been frugal, unable to waste a perfectly good container. That habit now served a new purpose. The transfer would happen at night. Richard took his vitamin every morning with his coffee. He would not open the bottle in the evening. I had a window after he fell asleep, which was always by 10:30, a deep and predictable sleep aided by a single glass of scotch. That night, I pretended to read in bed. Richard snored softly beside me. I waited an extra hour until the digital clock read 11:47. I slipped out of bed, my movements slow and silent. I retrieved the sewing basket and the empty vitamin bottle from the back of my closet. In the ensuite bathroom, I locked the door and turned on the small light over the sink. The room was cold, the tiles smooth under my bare feet. I took Richard's current vitamin bottle from the counter. I opened it and poured the capsules into the old, empty bottle. I would dispose of them later. The capsules were harmless. I felt no particular animosity toward them. They were just objects, like everything else in this house that had been part of the facade. Next, I opened the box of laxatives. The tablets were sealed in foil blister packs. I pushed each one through the foil, a series of soft pops that sounded incredibly loud in the quiet house. I filled the current, now empty vitamin bottle with the white tablets. They did not look like vitamins, they looked like medicine. I needed a visual barrier. I cut a circle of thin, opaque white paper from a shopping bag and fitted it inside the plastic cap. When screwed on, it would block the view of the pills inside. If he shook the bottle, it would sound correct. If he opened it, he would see only the white paper and would have to peel it back to see the pills, an action he would have no reason to take. His ritual was to shake one pill into his hand, not to inspect the contents. I placed the paper disc, then carefully poured the white tablets into the bottle. I screwed the cap on tightly. I shook it. The rattle was satisfyingly familiar. I held it up to the light. The paper disc was effective. Nothing was visible. I placed the doctored bottle back exactly where it had been, at the 10 o'clock position relative to his hairbrush. I flushed the empty blister packs down the toilet, one by one. I placed the legitimate vitamins, now in the old bottle, into the very bottom of the kitchen trash can, beneath coffee grounds and eggshells. They would be collected in 2 days. I washed my hands thoroughly. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was calm, my eyes clear. There was no tremble in my hands as I turned off the light. I felt a profound sense of focus, a channeling of all the fear and betrayal into this one, concrete action. I returned to bed. Richard stirred, rolling onto his side. "You all right?" he mumbled, half asleep. "Just needed a glass of water," I whispered. He grunted and was still. I lay awake, not with anxiety, but with a cold anticipation. The trap was set. The mechanism was simple, almost elegant in its symmetry. He had introduced a foreign, harmful substance into my body through my trusted routine. Now I had done the same to him. The difference was one of intent and knowledge. His act was one of covert murder. Mine was one of measured justice. The waiting began. The pills would take several hours to work. I calculated the timeline. He would take the pill with his morning coffee around 7:30. The effects would likely manifest by mid-morning, perhaps during his usual phone call to his golf partner, or while he was reading the paper in his study. The location did not matter, the result would be the same: a sudden, violent, and uncontrollable illness. I closed my eyes. I did not pray. I did not rage. I planned. I thought through the next steps, his reaction, my response, the performance I would need to give, the call to 911, the handing over of the evidence, the bottle itself. I rehearsed the concerned tone of my voice, the look of bewildered worry I would wear. The foundation was laid. The unraveling thread I had grasped in the pharmacy was now woven into a snare for the hand that had pulled it. I felt the real heart medication working in my veins, a steady chemical assurance. My strength was returning. His was about to be violently, publicly stripped away. The night passed slowly. I watched the numbers on the clock change, each minute bringing me closer to the moment when the world he had constructed would begin to fracture from within. The morning dawned clear and ordinary. I woke at my usual time, 6:30. Richard was still asleep. I rose, performed my ablutions, and took my legitimate heart medication with a full glass of water. The ritual was the same, but the substance was different. It felt like arming myself. I went downstairs. The kitchen was silent, filled with soft, early light. I began the coffee, measuring the grounds with my usual care. I set out 2 mugs, the cream, the sugar bowl. The routine was a script, and today I would perform it flawlessly. I heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs. He entered the kitchen, dressed in his casual Friday attire, khaki trousers, a polo shirt. He looked rested, unchanged. He had no idea the ground had shifted beneath him. "Morning," he said, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, pouring the coffee. "It's going to be a beautiful day." He grunted in agreement, taking his seat at the table. I placed his mug in front of him, the steam curling in the sunlight. I brought my own mug and sat across from him. The newspaper was between us, a barrier of normalcy. He took a long sip, then reached for the vitamin bottle. My heart did not skip. My breath remained even. I watched, my expression one of mild interest as he shook it. The rattle was just right. He unscrewed the cap. He saw the white paper disc. He paused, frowning for a half-second. "What's this?" he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my tone light. "There's paper in the cap. Must be some new safety thing." He picked at the edge with his thumbnail, but it was snug. He shrugged. He did not peel it back. He simply tilted the bottle over his palm and shook. A single white tablet fell into his hand. He stared at it for a moment. It was smaller than his usual capsule, a different shape. "They changed the formula," he said, a statement of faint annoyance. "Probably cheaper. Everything's pills now instead of capsules." "I'm sure it's the same inside," I said, stirring my coffee. "They're always changing packaging." He nodded, accepting the logic. Why would he doubt it? The bottle was his. It had been on his counter. The label was correct. His world was orderly, and he was at its center. Suspicion required a disruption of that order, and from his perspective, nothing was disrupted. Only the shape of a pill. He placed the tablet on his tongue and washed it down with a gulp of coffee. The deed was done. The mechanism was engaged. I felt a cool stillness settle over me. The point of no return was now behind us. There was a strange relief in it. "What are your plans today?" I asked, taking a sip from my mug. "I've got some paperwork to finish in the study. Might prune those overgrown roses later if it stays cool." He took another drink. "You?" "I'll likely stay in the garden. The lilies need dividing." My voice was calm, conversational. We were a retired couple discussing a gentle day. The banality was the perfect camouflage. We finished our coffee in companionable silence, or what he perceived as companionship. I was observing, noting the time. The pill would need to travel through his system. The active ingredient was a stimulant. It would induce powerful, rapid contractions. I estimated 3 hours, perhaps 4. It would start with cramps. He stood, taking his mug to the sink. He leaned down and brushed a dry kiss on my cheek. It was his habitual gesture. My skin did not flinch. I smiled up at him. "Don't work too hard," I said. "You either," he replied and walked out toward his study. I remained at the table, finishing my coffee. The sun was warmer now, streaming across the polished wood. I listened to the familiar sounds of the house settling, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant tap of computer keys from his study. Everything was as it had been for years. I cleared the table. I washed the mugs and the coffee pot. I wiped the counters. Each action was deliberate, grounding. I was not waiting in frantic anxiety. I was preparing for the next scene. Around 9 o'clock, I went out to the garden. I took my trowel and knelt by the lily bed. The soil was cool and damp. I began to carefully separate the thick bulbs, my hands working on autopilot. My mind was clear. I reviewed the sequence of events that would follow. He would feel the first twinge. He would dismiss it as indigestion. Then the pain would sharpen, becoming urgent. He would make his way to the bathroom. The violence of the reaction would shock him. He would be confused, then frightened. He would call for me. My role was to be confused alongside him, then concerned, then decisively helpful. I would be the worried wife. I would suggest it must be something he ate. I would mention his new vitamins. I would, with apparent reluctance, propose calling for help. From my place in the garden, I could see the side window of his study. At 10:15, I saw him stand up from his desk. He placed a hand on his stomach. He stood still for a moment, then walked out of view, presumably toward the hall bathroom. I continued my work. I divided 3 more bulbs, placing them gently into new holes, covering them with soil. My hands were steady. The sun was warm on my back. 20 minutes later, the back door flew open. Richard stood there, his face pale, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. His posture was bent slightly. "Ella." His voice was tight. "I don't feel well, not well at all." I set down my trowel and stood, brushing the dirt from my knees. I allowed a look of mild concern to touch my features. "What's wrong? You look pale." "Cramps, severe, and other things." He was embarrassed, clutching his abdomen. "It came on so fast." "Maybe something you ate didn't agree with you," I said, walking toward him. "Come inside. Sit down." He shook his head, a jerky motion. "I don't think I can sit. It's intense." A spasm crossed his face, and he turned and hurried back into the house, toward the downstairs bathroom. I followed at a normal pace. I stood in the hallway listening to the sounds of his distress from behind the closed door. I felt nothing resembling pity. I felt the cold satisfaction of a correct calculation. The reaction was proceeding as predicted. This was the beginning. The bitter brew had been served. He had drunk it willingly, unsuspectingly. Now his body would rebel in the most fundamental, uncontrollable way. The first act of his humiliation was a private one, behind a locked door. The next would be public. I went to the kitchen and filled a glass with water. I waited. The performance was about to become much more demanding. I took a deep, quiet breath and set my face into an expression of gathering worry. The concerned wife was ready. The avenger remained hidden, watching, waiting for the right moment to dial for help. I stood in the hallway, the glass of water cool in my hand. The sounds from behind the bathroom door were unmistakable, retching, followed by the painful, urgent sounds of intestinal distress. He was moaning, a low, continuous sound of misery and shock. I waited. The performance required proper timing. After several minutes, the toilet flushed. There was a long pause. Then the door unlocked and opened a crack. Richard's face appeared, chalk white, his eyes wide with a confusion that was deepening into fear. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead and upper lip. "Ella," he gasped, "something is very wrong." "You're burning up," I said, stepping forward to place a hand on his forehead. His skin was clammy. "Maybe it's food poisoning. What did you eat last night that I didn't?" He shook his head, wincing as another cramp seized him. He doubled over, clutching the door frame. "Nothing. We ate the same thing." He took a ragged breath. It's like my insides are tearing apart. He stumbled back into the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before another wave of violent illness took him. This was not a simple stomach bug. This was a systemic purge, brutal and relentless. I remained in the doorway, a portrait of concerned observation. For the next hour, the cycle repeated. He would collapse onto the cool tiles, breathing heavily, only to be racked by another spasm minutes later. He was trembling, his polo shirt soaked through with sweat. The confident man who had left the breakfast table was gone, replaced by a frail, terrified animal in pain. "I need a doctor," he said during a brief lull. His voice was weak. "This isn't stopping." "Should I call Dr. Evans?" I asked, referring to our general practitioner. He could call in a prescription. "No." The word was sharp, panicked. "This is beyond that. I need a hospital. I feel dehydrated. My heart is racing." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Call 911, please." I hesitated, allowing a look of appropriate worry to cross my face. "An ambulance? Richard, is it that serious?" "Yes," he cried, his composure shattered. A fresh cramp contorted his features, and he groaned, curling into a ball on the floor. "Please, Ella, I can't stand it. Call them now." This was the moment. The begging, the utter helplessness. He was completely in my power, and he did not know it. He saw only his wife, a potential lifeline. "All right," I said, my voice softening with feigned reassurance. "I'll call. Just try to stay calm." I left him there on the bathroom floor and walked to the living room phone. My movements were not hurried. I picked up the cordless receiver, my finger hovering over the keypad. I could still hear his ragged breaths from down the hall. I pressed 911. The dispatcher answered, her voice professionally calm. 911, what is your emergency?" I summoned a tremor into my voice, a believable vibration of stress. "My husband, he's very sick. He's in intense abdominal distress. He's vomiting, he's having diarrhea, he's in terrible pain. He's on the bathroom floor. He's 68. He has a history of high blood pressure." I provided our address, speaking clearly but with underlying urgency. "Is he conscious and breathing?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes, he's conscious, but he's very weak and in pain. He's sweating profusely. He asked me to call." "An ambulance is on the way. Stay with him. Try to keep him comfortable." I hung up and returned to the bathroom. Richard was now sitting propped against the bathtub, his legs splayed out, utterly spent. He looked up as I entered. "They're coming," I said. "Thank you," he whispered, closing his eyes. Then they snapped open. "My vitamins, the new ones. Could it be?" "What about them?" I asked, tilting my head. "They look different. What if they're contaminated? What if I'm having a reaction?" His mind was scrambling for a cause, landing on the only variable that had changed. "That's possible," I said slowly, as if considering it for the first time. "You should tell the paramedics. They'll need to see the bottle." His eyes widened in alarm. Yes, get it. Bring it to me." I went to the kitchen counter and retrieved the doctored bottle. I held it in my hand for a moment, feeling the weight of the remaining tablets inside. This was the evidence. It would be analyzed. They would find a powerful laxative where a vitamin should be. A shocking manufacturing error. A tragic accident. I brought it to him. He clutched it weakly as if it were a talisman. The sirens became audible in the distance, growing louder. The sound seemed to energize him with a final burst of hope. Soon the doorbell rang, followed by a firm knock. "Paramedics! In here!" I called out, my voice pitched with relieved urgency. 2 EMTs, a man and a woman, entered the hallway with a gurney. They took in the scene. The pale, sweating man on the bathroom floor, the distressed wife hovering nearby. I gave them the essential details, my voice concise. Sudden onset about 90 minutes ago. Severe abdominal cramping, vomiting, diarrhea. He's very weak. He thinks it might be his new vitamins. I gestured to the bottle in Richard's hand. The female EMT took it, glanced at the label, then shook it, hearing the pills. "We'll bring it with us for the doctors to check. "Sir, can you tell me what you're feeling?" As Richard began to stammer out his symptoms, the male EMT helped him onto the gurney. The process was humiliating for him, this proud man being strapped down, covered with a blanket, wheeled out of his own home in full view of the neighbors who had gathered on their lawns. His eyes met mine as they lifted him into the ambulance. They held a desperate, bewildered fear. "I'll follow in the car," I said to the paramedic. "Meet us at County General." I nodded, watching the doors close. The ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing, but its siren off now. Not a critical emergency, but a serious one. A spectacle of misfortune. I stood on the front step for a moment, the quiet of the suburban street settling back in. The neighbors slowly dispersed. I went inside, closed the door, and locked it. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at the empty spot on the kitchen counter where the vitamin bottle had been. The trap had sprung perfectly. He was in the system now. The reckoning had begun, not with a confrontation, but with a medical crisis. His body had been the first witness to testify against him. The hospital would be the second. My role was to be the third, the loyal, bewildered wife, handing over the crucial piece of evidence. I took a deep breath, collected my purse and car keys, and prepared to play my part. The drive to County General was a study in quiet focus. I did not speed. I observed traffic laws. The normalcy of the act was a necessary part of the performance. I parked in the visitor lot, gathered my purse, and walked through the automatic doors into the bright, sterile chaos of the emergency room. I gave Richard's name at the triage desk. The clerk directed me to a curtained bay in the treatment area. When I pulled the curtain aside, I saw him on a gurney, an IV line already inserted into his arm, a bag of clear fluid hanging above him. He looked smaller, swallowed by the hospital sheets. His eyes were closed, but he was awake, his face tense with residual pain and profound exhaustion. A young doctor was speaking to him. "Severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance from the rapid fluid loss. The IV will help. We've given you something for the cramping. The symptoms are consistent with a powerful irritant in your GI tract." Richard opened his eyes and saw me. A weak, grateful expression flickered across his face. "Ella, this is Dr. Sharma." The doctor turned to me. He had a kind, tired face. "Mrs. Prescott, I was just telling your husband we're running tests. We have the bottle you provided." He held up the clear plastic bag containing the vitamin bottle. He said he took one this morning, and the pills looked different than usual. I allowed my brow to furrow with concern. Yes, he mentioned that at breakfast. He thought they'd changed the formula. I told him it was probably just new packaging. I delivered the line with a hint of self-reproach, as if I should have been more suspicious. "It's not uncommon for supplements to be contaminated," Dr. Sharma said. "We see it with weight loss products, bodybuilding mixes, sometimes manufacturing errors, sometimes deliberate adulteration." He said the last part carefully. "We'll send these to the lab for analysis. In the meantime, we're going to admit him for observation. He needs to be rehydrated, and we need to monitor his cardiac function. His heart rate is quite elevated from the stress of this." "Of course," I said, moving to stand beside the gurney. I placed a hand on Richard's arm. His skin was cool. "Whatever he needs." A nurse came in to adjust the IV flow. "We'll be moving him to a room on the 3rd floor shortly. You can follow up there, ma'am." I nodded. Richard's fingers closed weakly around my wrist. "Stay," he mumbled. "I'll be right here," I said softly. Once he was settled in a private room on the medical ward, the process repeated with new personnel. A floor nurse took his vitals. A hospitalist came in, reviewed the chart, and asked many of the same questions. Each time I provided the same answers, my story consistent and simple. My demeanor was one of supportive worry, a wife hovering helpfully, answering when spoken to, otherwise quiet. As I called Maureen from the hallway payphone, my voice was low. "He's in the hospital. Severe gastrointestinal reaction. They're testing his vitamins." There was a beat of silence on the other end. "I see." Maureen said. Her tone was neutral, but I heard the understanding in it. How are you holding up? I'm managing. It's been a shock. That, at least, was true. Do you need anything? Not yet, thank you, Maureen. When I returned to the room, Richard was dozing, the medication finally allowing him some rest. I took the chair by the window. I did not fidget. I did not wring my hands. I sat, my posture erect, my hands folded in my lap. I watched the steady drip of the IV, the rise and fall of his chest. I observed him with the same clinical detachment I imagined the doctors used. In the late afternoon, a man in a shirt and tie, not a lab coat, entered the room. He introduced himself as Mr. Dolan from Hospital Administration, Risk Management. He carried a clipboard. Mrs. Prescott, a moment of your time? He asked, his voice professionally somber. Of course. We stepped just outside the room. This is a concerning situation, he began. The preliminary visual inspection of the tablets in that bottle suggests they are not vitamins. They match the appearance of a strong stimulant laxative. We've notified the FDA and the manufacturer. There will be an investigation. I allowed my hand to fly to my mouth, a gesture of shock. A laxative? In a vitamin bottle? How is that possible? It could be a horrific error at the plant, Dolan said. Or it could be tampering somewhere along the supply chain. We'll need to know where the product was purchased. My husband buys them in bulk from Budget Mart, the one on Route 9. He's been using that brand for years. I provided the information readily, helpfully. He noted it down. We'll need to contact that store, pull their stock. In cases like this, there can be liability. The hospital's legal team may be in touch. I understand, I said, my voice trembling slightly. We're just so grateful he's getting care. It's so frightening. I infused the words with a vulnerable quaver. He's in good hands, Dolan assured me. The main thing is he's stable. The lab will confirm the substance, but the clinical picture is clear. He ingested a potent irritant. I thanked him. He left and I returned to the chair. The performance was holding. I had handed them the evidence. I had provided the purchase location. I had acted the part of the shocked spouse. The narrative was solidifying. Richard Prescott, victim of a dangerous product defect. Richard stirred, his eyes opening. He looked at me, his gaze clearer now but shadowed with a new emotion. A dawning, terrible suspicion. The medical explanation was being given to him, but he had been the one to swallow the pill. He had felt its effects. He had seen the white tablet, and he knew, on some level deeper than logic, that the world did not work with such cruel, random precision. They think it's the vitamins, he said, his voice a dry rasp. That's what they said. A terrible mistake at the factory. I met his gaze, my expression one of sincere relief. Thank God you're all right. He continued to stare at me. The gratitude that had been there earlier was gone, replaced by a slow, chilling calculation. He was remembering my recent fatigue, my doctor's appointments, my pill bottle. He was connecting points, but the picture he was forming was impossible for him to accept. It would mean his meek, orderly wife was capable of this. It would mean he was not the victim of fate, but of design. He said nothing more. He closed his eyes again, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The seed of doubt was planted. It would fester in the quiet of the hospital room. My performance for the outside world was complete. The next performance would be for him alone. I sat back in the chair, waiting for him to wake fully, to have the strength for the quiet word I knew was coming. The public facade was established. Now, the private reckoning could begin. He was admitted for 48 hours of observation. I became a fixture in the room, the dutiful wife on vigil. I brought a small knitting project from home, a simple, endless scarf in gray wool. The click of the needles provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the beeps of the monitors and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes in the hall. Richard slept fitfully, woken often for vital checks or when cramps still ghosted through his system. He was weak, his body depleted. The humiliation was a constant companion. Nurses helped him to the commode by the bed, their professionalism a stark contrast to his utter dependence. He avoided my eyes during these moments, his pride in tatters. Doctors made their rounds. The attending physician, an older woman named Dr. Vance, confirmed the lab results. The tablets are bisacodyl, a strong stimulant laxative, 10 milligrams each. A standard dose is 5 to 10. The bottle contained at least 20 of them, all identical. This was not a cross-contamination. This was a bottle filled with the wrong product. How could that happen? I asked, setting my knitting aside, my face a mask of concerned incredulity. We've contacted the distributor and the FDA. The lot number on your husband's bottle doesn't match any recent shipments of that vitamin brand. The label appears authentic, but the lot code is fabricated. Dr. Vance spoke carefully. This suggests the tampering happened after manufacturing, possibly at the retail level or... She let the alternative hang. Or it was an act of deliberate substitution elsewhere. Richard listened, propped up on pillows. His face was ashen. You mean someone could have done this on purpose? It's a possibility we must consider, given the evidence. Has anyone had access to your supplements? A disgruntled employee? A personal dispute? Dr. Vance's gaze was neutral, sweeping between us. No, Richard said quickly, too quickly. Of course not. It must be the store. I bought them from Budget Mart. They must have a problem. We're following up with them, Dr. Vance said. In the meantime, you're recovering well. The fluids have helped. Your electrolytes are stabilizing. We'll discharge you tomorrow if you can keep down solid food. After she left, the room was quiet. Richard stared at the ceiling. I picked up my knitting. The silence between us was no longer companionable. It was charged, thick with unspoken accusations and a terrifying new knowledge. A nurse's aide brought a lunch tray. Broth, gelatin, crackers. Richard looked at it with nausea. I can't, he muttered. You need to try, I said, not looking up from my stitches. They won't let you go home otherwise. He picked up a spoon, his hand trembling slightly. He managed a few sips of broth. Each swallow seemed an effort. He was a proud man diminished, and every small failure ate at him. Visiting hours brought a few well-wishers. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, popped her head in with a get-well card. Richard forced a smile, accepting her pity with visible discomfort. His golf partner, Jerry, called on the room phone. I heard Richard's side of the conversation, brief and embarrassed. Yes, a bad reaction to some vitamins. No, I'll be fine. Just unlucky. After each interaction, he sank back into the pillows, exhausted. His world, which had been so orderly and under his control, was now subject to the whims of shift changes, dietary schedules, and the pity of others. He was trapped in the role of victim, a role I had crafted for him. I continued to knit. The gray yarn wound and looped, growing longer. The repetitive motion was soothing. It gave my hands a purpose and my face a placid, preoccupied expression. Inside, I felt a profound and quiet satisfaction. This was justice, not as an abstract concept, but as a physical reality. He was experiencing a fraction of the helplessness he had imposed on me. His prison was a hospital bed. Mine had been my own weakening body. On the second afternoon, a patient advocate from the hospital came by, a gentle-voiced woman who explained we could seek legal counsel regarding the tainted product. Richard listened, nodding vaguely. When she left, he turned his head on the pillow to look at me. I met his gaze, my hands still moving, the needles clicking softly. "You've been very calm," he said. His voice was low, stripped of its usual authority. "There's no use in getting upset," I replied. "You're getting the care you need." "You haven't cried. You haven't been frantic." "Would that help you?" I asked, a genuine question. He didn't answer. He watched me knit. "You took up your knitting again. You haven't done that in months." "It passes the time," I said. He was silent for a long while. The television was off. The only sounds were the hospital's ambient hum and my needles. He was studying me, seeing me clearly for the first time in years, perhaps ever. He was looking past the wife, past the patient, and seeing the woman who had sat in the garden calculating, the woman who had driven to the pharmacy, the woman who had waited for him to fall asleep. The suspicion in his eyes had crystallized into a dreadful certainty. He knew it was me. But the knowledge was trapped inside him, useless. To voice it would be to admit he understood the motive. To voice it would be to accuse his frail, attentive wife of a bizarre and malicious act with no evidence, while all official channels pointed to a tragic accident. He was caught in the narrative I had built. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to escape. The waiting game was tilting in my favor with every silent hour. His physical recovery was underway, but his psychological siege was just beginning. I knitted another row, the fabric of my revenge growing steadily, stitch by quiet stitch. The silence after the nurse left was absolute. The door had swished shut, leaving us in the antiseptic quiet of the room. My knitting needles were still. I had reached the end of a row. I set the project aside on the bedside table, the gray wool a soft lump next to the plastic water pitcher. Richard was watching me. He had been watching for a long time. His color was better, but his eyes were hollow, the bruises of fatigue and shock beneath them. He had eaten a full dinner, his first solid meal. Strength was returning to his body, but it brought no comfort. It only sharpened his mind and the terrible thought it now held. The wall-mounted television was off. The only light came from the fluorescent panel above his bed and the dim glow of the monitors. The world outside the window was dark. He cleared his throat, a dry scraping sound. Ella. I turned my head to look at him. I said nothing. His voice, when it came, was a whisper, strained and thin. What did you do? The question hung in the air between us. It was not an explosion. It was not an accusation hurled in rage. It was a terrified confession, an acknowledgement that the impossible was true. He was asking for confirmation of his own nightmare. I held his gaze. For the first time in 43 years, I did not look away, did not soften my expression, did not offer a reassuring word. I let him see the woman I had become, the woman he had created. I reached into my purse, which sat on the floor beside my chair. My movements were slow, deliberate. I withdrew a small plastic prescription bottle. It was empty. I held it up so the light caught the label. It was my old bottle, the one Maureen had called about, the one that had contained the sugar pills. I placed it on the rolling bedside table, next to his water cup. The sound of the plastic on the laminated surface was a soft tap. I pushed the table toward him, just enough so the bottle was within his reach. He stared at it. His breath hitched. He recognized it. He knew exactly what it was. His eyes moved from the bottle to my face, back to the bottle. The color drained from his newly regained complexion. "They're placebos," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, as if remarking on the weather. Sugar pills, that's what the pharmacist told me. I hadn't taken my heart medication for over a month. That's why I was so weak. That's why I was dying. He made a sound, a choked gasp. His hand fluttered on the blanket as if wanting to reach for the bottle to confirm its reality, but he could not make his fingers obey. "You replaced them," he whispered. It was not a question. "You replaced them first," I corrected, my tone still even. "I simply returned the favor, with a different substance, one that works much faster." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The reality of it was crashing over him, not as a theory, but as a concrete sequence of events. My fatigue, the pharmacist's call, my sudden trip to the pharmacy, the different pill in his bottle, the violent illness, the hospital, the investigation into a tainted product. It was not a random tragedy. It was a chain, and I had pulled every link into place. "You tried to kill me," he said, the words barely audible. "You are killing me," I replied. "Or you were. Slowly. You thought no one would notice. You thought I was too weak, too trusting, too stupid to figure it out. I leaned forward slightly, my elbows on my knees. You were wrong. He shook his head, a frantic, denying motion. I didn't. You did. I cut him off. There was no room for his lies. Not here, not now. The label on that bottle is a fake. The pharmacist confirmed it. You had it made. You put the fake pills in there. You watched me take them every day. The truth, laid out in that quiet, sterile room, was more violent than any physical blow. It stripped him bare. All his control, his secret superiority, his plan, it was all exposed, and it had been turned against him with brutal efficiency. Why? The word was a ragged plea. You tell me, I said. Life insurance? Is there another woman, or was it just that you were tired of me? Tired of the life we built? I let the questions hang. I did not need the answers, not really. The motive was irrelevant. The act was everything. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sight of me and the empty bottle. He was trembling. What happens now? He asked, his voice broken. You will be discharged tomorrow, I said, as if discussing a mundane schedule. You will come home. You will tell everyone you were the victim of a terrible manufacturing error. You will be grateful for your recovery. You will be kind to your wife, who stayed by your side. I paused, letting the instructions sink in. And you will live with this. You will live with the knowledge that I know. Every day. Every time you look at me. He opened his eyes. They were wide, with a new kind of fear, deeper than the pain of his illness. It was the fear of a man who has lost all power, who is seen completely, and who is utterly at the mercy of the person he wronged. And if I don't? If I tell them? A faint, cold smile touched my lips. It was the first one I had allowed in his presence since the call. Tell them what? That your wife, who is beloved by the nurses for her quiet devotion, who handed over the tainted bottle to the paramedics, who has a documented heart condition you were managing, that she somehow obtained a prescription-strength laxative, fabricated a fake vitamin label, and poisoned you, while you were slowly poisoning her with untraceable sugar pills. I tilted my head. Who would believe that story, Richard? Which of us looks more capable of such a thing? He had no answer. He had built the perfect alibi for himself, the frail, ailing wife, and I had used it as my armor. His own arrogance had boxed him in. I stood up. I picked up my purse and my knitting. The confrontation was over. The truth was now a shared, poisonous thing in the room, but it was mine to control. Get some rest, I said, my voice reverting to its former, wifely tone, but the warmth was an empty mimicry now. We have a lot to discuss when you come home. I walked to the door. I did not look back. I could feel his eyes on me, filled with a terror that was more profound than any he had felt on the bathroom floor. The physical ordeal was ending. The real sentence was just beginning. I had spoken my quiet word. It was more devastating than any scream. The power had shifted, irrevocably and finally. I drove to the hospital the next morning to bring him home. He was dressed and sitting in the discharge wheelchair by the nurse's station, a small bag of belongings on his lap. He looked smaller, aged by more than just a few days of illness. His eyes tracked me as I approached, but he said nothing. He signed the release forms with a hand that still trembled. The ride home was silent. He stared out the passenger window, his posture rigid. I focused on the road, the familiar streets, the houses, the trees. They were the same, but everything within the car was different. We were no longer a couple returning from a medical scare. We were a warden and a prisoner, though which of us was which would depend on one's perspective. I pulled into the garage. He got out slowly, moving with the caution of an old man. He followed me into the house. The kitchen was clean, the breakfast dishes put away. Sunlight streamed in. It looked peaceful. It felt like a stage. Let's sit in the living room, I said. It was not a suggestion. He obeyed, lowering himself carefully into his usual armchair by the fireplace. I did not sit. I remained standing, my back to the large garden window. I held the advantage of position, of light. The doctors said you need rest and a bland diet for a few more days, I began, my tone practical. I've prepared the guest room for you. The bed is made. Your things from our room are already there. He blinked, absorbing this. Being banished from the master bedroom was a symbolic defeat, but also a practical necessity. I would not sleep in the same room with him again. Why? He asked again, the same broken word from the hospital. We'll get to that, I said. First, the new rules. You will stay in the guest room. You will not enter my room without explicit permission. You will continue to tell everyone, friends, family, Jerry, that you were the unfortunate victim of a product recall. You will express your gratitude for my care. You will be civil. You will not raise your voice to me. You will not touch me. He listened, his face a mask of stunned resignation. Second, I continued, finances. You will sign a durable power of attorney, granting me sole control over all our joint accounts, investments, and assets. You will also sign a new will, leaving everything to me irrevocably. I have already contacted Arthur Mills. Arthur was our longtime lawyer. He's drawing up the documents. He thinks it's a prudent step given your recent health crisis and my need to manage things. He'll bring them by tomorrow for your signature. Richard's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. I am completely serious. If you refuse, I will take the empty placebo bottle and the pharmacist's testimony to the police. I will also tell them about your recent inquiries into doubling my life insurance policy, which I found in your desk drawer yesterday. The narrative will change from a tragic accident to attempted murder. You will spend whatever years you have left in a prison cell. I doubt you would survive it. The color drained from his face once more. He had not known I was aware of the insurance. It was the final piece of evidence, the motive laid bare. He was cornered. You've thought of everything, he whispered, a statement of defeat. I had a good teacher, I replied. You taught me that patience and planning are everything. Now you have a choice. You can sign the papers, live here quietly under my rules, and maintain your reputation as a fortunate survivor. Or you can fight me and lose everything, your freedom, your name, what little health you have left. He looked down at his hands, clasped in his lap. They were the hands that had held the fake pill bottle, that had poured my medication away. They looked feeble now. And if I sign, what kind of life is that? It's the life you intended for me, I said, my voice cold and clear. A life of diminishing strength, of quiet dependence, of waiting for the end. The difference is, you will be aware of it. You will live with the knowledge of what you did and of what I did in return. That is your punishment. There was a long silence. The clock on the mantel ticked. I could see the calculations behind his eyes, the frantic search for a way out, and the slow, dreadful realization that there was none. The structure of his life, which he had believed was built on his control, had been hollowed out from beneath him. All right, he said, the word a sigh of surrender. Good. I walked to the desk in the corner and took out 2 sets of keys. I placed one on the coffee table in front of him. This is for the guest room. You may come and go as you please within the common areas. I kept the other set in my hand. I will be changing the locks on the master bedroom and my study. Your access to my spaces and to any important documents is now revoked. He stared at the single key on the table as if it were a poisonous insect. Your suitcase is upstairs. You should go and rest. I'll bring you some lunch later. He pushed himself up from the chair, moving with a stiff, painful slowness that was not entirely an act. He picked up the key. He did not look at me. He walked out of the living room, and I heard his slow, heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. I stood in the sunlight listening, the click of the guest room door opening, then closing. The faint sound of the lock engaging from the inside. The new terms were set. The house was now mine. The finances would soon be mine. His freedom was an illusion, a gilded cage of his own making, now under my lock and key. He would live, but he would live in the shadow of his crime and my forgiveness, which would never come. The quiet word in the hospital had become a deafening law in this house. The performance was over. This was the new reality. The garden had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt like a true kingdom. I sat on the wrought iron bench beneath the maple tree, a cup of tea cooling beside me. The late afternoon sun was warm on my skin, a gentle contrast to the cool shade. My hands rested in my lap, steady and still. There was no tremor. From here, I could see the back of the house. The window of the guest room was open, the curtain stirring slightly in the breeze. Richard was up there, a silent, contained presence. He had signed the power of attorney and the new will yesterday in front of Arthur Mills. Our lawyer had been warmly sympathetic, praising my foresight in securing our assets given Richard's fragile health. Richard had signed without meeting my eyes, his signature a shaky scrawl. The documents were now in my safe. A car pulled into the driveway. A few moments later, Maureen came around the side of the house carrying a small bakery box. She smiled when she saw me. "I come bearing lemon squares," she said. "You are a welcome sight," I said, and I meant it. I gestured to the seat beside me. "The tea is fresh." She sat, placing the box on the small table between us. She poured herself a cup. For a few minutes, we sat in comfortable silence, listening to the birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. It was a normal sound, a peaceful sound. "How are you?" Maureen asked finally, her tone careful but direct. "I am well," I said. "My medication is regulating. My strength has returned. I slept through the night last night." These were simple facts, but each one felt like a victory. And him? I glanced up at the window. He stays in his room mostly. He reads, he watches television, he is quiet, he is afraid. I took a sip of my tea. "It is a sufficient arrangement." Maureen nodded slowly. She did not ask for details. She had inferred enough from the hospital, from the tainted vitamins, from my calm resolve. "The store manager from Budget Mart called the pharmacy," she said after a moment. "They're conducting an internal investigation. They found no other contaminated bottles. They're calling it an isolated tampering incident, likely by a disgruntled customer who returned a doctored product. They've issued a vague recall notice for possible labeling inconsistencies. It will blow over. That's for the best," I said. The official story was holding, protecting us both in its own way. It shielded me from suspicion and him from a worse fate. It was the story we would both live with. "What will you do now, Ella?" Maureen's question was not about survival, but about living. I looked out over the flower beds, the vibrant lilies I had divided, the neat rows of herbs. "I will take a trip," I said. "Perhaps a cruise. I've always wanted to see the Greek islands. I'll need to hire a nurse companion for Richard, of course, given his delicate health. Someone reliable to ensure he takes his correct medications and eats properly." A faint smile touched Maureen's lips. "Of course, that's very responsible of you." I've also decided to volunteer at the library again. The new head librarian has been asking. I think I'd enjoy it. It was a return to myself, to the woman I was before I became a fading wife. "That sounds perfect for you." We drank our tea. The lemon squares were tart and sweet. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house, bathed in the golden light, no longer looked like a gilded cage. It looked like a house. My house. "Thank you, Maureen," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "For the call, for believing me." She reached over and patted my hand. "We look out for each other," she said simply. When she left, I remained in the garden as twilight gathered. The lights in the house began to come on. I saw Richard's silhouette pass in front of his window. He moved slowly, a shadow puppet in a small, well-defined box. I felt no hatred in that moment. The cold, sharp fury that had powered my calculations had settled into a permanent, quiet certainty. He was a part of my life, but no longer the center of it. He was a fact to be managed, like the weather or the taxes. I stood and collected the teacups. My body moved with an ease I had forgotten. The weakness was gone, banished by the real medicine and the stronger medicine of reclaimed power. I was not a victim who had gotten revenge. I was a survivor who had corrected a fatal imbalance. I walked back to the house. I unlocked the kitchen door. I had changed those locks too and stepped inside. The air was cool. I could hear the faint sound of a television news program from upstairs. I washed the cups, dried them, and put them away. I climbed the stairs, my steps even and strong. I passed the closed door of the guest room without a pause. I entered my bedroom, my sanctuary within the sanctuary, and closed the door. I turned the lock with a solid, satisfying click. I sat at my dressing table and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back had silver gray hair and eyes that were calm and clear. She looked her age, but she also looked strong. She looked like someone who could not be invisible. She looked like someone who had remembered how to live. The story was over. The revenge was complete. But my life, for the first time in a long time, was just beginning. I turned off the light and went to bed, and I did not dream of pills or poison or helplessness. I slept, deeply and without fear, in the quiet house that was finally, truly, my own.